The Five Dysfunctions of a Team, a leadership fable by Patrick Lencioni. Patrick Lencioni's The Five Dysfunctions of a Team cuts through the noise of conventional leadership advice to expose the raw, often uncomfortable truth about why teams fail. At the heart of every dysfunctional team lies not a lack of skill, talent, or resources, but a failure to address deep-rooted behavioral issues that silently sabotage progress. Lencioni delivers his insights through a gripping fable centered around Catherine Peterson, the newly appointed CEO of Decision Tech, a once promising startup teetering on the brink of collapse due to its fractured executive team. Catherine's challenge is not technical, it's human. The team suffers from a lack of trust, fear of conflict, avoidance of accountability, lack of commitment, and inattention to results. Lencioni's narrative transcends mere storytelling. It's a blueprint for every leader grappling with team dysfunction. The lessons aren't abstract. They are sharp, actionable, and immediately applicable. You aren't just reading about team dynamics, you're being handed the tools to dismantle dysfunction and rebuild trust, clarity, and cohesion. Catherine's journey becomes your roadmap, and her struggles mirror the ones you've likely encountered in your own leadership journey. The brilliance of this book lies in its brutal honesty and practical wisdom. No jargon, no fluff, just the unvarnished truth about teamwork and the courage required to fix what's broken. Lesson 1. Build trust through vulnerability. At the core of every dysfunctional team lies an absence of trust, not the shallow, transactional trust built on predictability or surface-level dependability, but the deep, unshakable trust that emerges from vulnerability. Vulnerability-based trust isn't about believing someone will meet a deadline or show up on time. It's about having absolute confidence that they'll be honest, transparent, and unafraid to admit weakness. Catherine quickly realizes that her team members are masters of guarded professionalism. They walk into meetings wearing masks of composure and polish, nod in agreement to avoid confrontation, and carefully sidestep any moment that might expose their fears or insecurities. They play it safe, prioritizing self-preservation over collective success. Patrick Lencioni dismantles the myth that trust can be built through superficial team-building exercises, corporate retreats, or motivational speeches. These might temporarily boost morale, but they won't address the deep-seated fear of being seen as imperfect. Real trust, the kind that allows teams to engage in raw, productive conflict and make bold decisions, only emerges when leaders go first. Leaders must admit mistakes openly, ask for help without shame, and be willing to say the hardest words in leadership: "I was wrong," or "I don't know." Catherine doesn't just talk about vulnerability, she models it. She shares her own fears, opens up about her professional missteps, and sets the tone for her team to follow. At first, her team resists. Vulnerability feels dangerous. It exposes flaws, invites judgment, and threatens carefully constructed professional armor. But over time, her team begins to soften. Small admissions turn into honest conversations. Defensive postures give way to authentic dialogue. Consider the Apollo 13 crisis, a masterclass in trust and vulnerability under pressure. When the spacecraft suffered catastrophic damage, engineers and astronauts had no choice but to rely on one another's expertise without ego or pretense. In that room, vulnerability wasn't optional. It was survival. The team didn't have time for defensiveness, political maneuvering, or self-preservation. They had to speak plainly, admit uncertainties, and collaborate in real time to solve an impossible problem. Success wasn't built on blind optimism or charismatic speeches. It was forged in an environment where every voice mattered, and no one feared ridicule for speaking up. That's the power of vulnerability-based trust. You might not be navigating a literal life or death scenario, but your team is navigating challenges that demand the same level of openness. Compare this with Ernest Shackleton's legendary Antarctic expedition on the Endurance. When disaster struck and the ship became trapped in ice, Shackleton didn't pretend to have all the answers. He admitted the gravity of their situation, shared his fears with his crew, and asked for their collective effort to survive. His vulnerability didn't make him weak, it made him relatable. and it earned him unwavering loyalty from his team. Shackleton's crew trusted him not because he was infallible, but because he was honest. That honesty created an unbreakable bond, and together they achieved one of the most extraordinary survival stories in history. Now, turn inward and examine your own team. Do your team members feel safe admitting they're stuck, confused, or overwhelmed? Do they trust you enough to say, "I need help," without fearing embarrassment or repercussions? If the answer is no, you're facing a trust problem, and it starts with you. Vulnerability isn't a one-time event, it's a daily practice. You can't expect your team to embrace openness if you aren't modeling it yourself. Start small, share a professional mistake, admit when you don't have the answer, or ask for feedback on your performance. These moments might feel uncomfortable at first, but they will ripple outward. Vulnerability is contagious. When you lead with humility, your team will follow. Don't mistake vulnerability for weakness. It's the foundation of strength. Without it, every other element of teamwork collapses under the weight of suspicion, defensiveness, and guarded interactions. Trust isn't built through grand gestures or motivational slogans. It's built through daily acts of honesty, humility, and courage. Every admission of fault, every moment of transparency, and every act of shared humanity adds another brick to the foundation of trust. Your team isn't looking for a perfect leader, they're looking for an honest one. Trust doesn't form overnight, but every courageous admission, every honest conversation, and every moment of vulnerability brings you one step closer. Without trust, your team is just a collection of individuals moving in separate directions. With trust, they become something far more powerful, a unified force capable of extraordinary results. You must go first, not because it's easy, but because it's essential. Without vulnerability, nothing else you build will stand. Lesson 2. Embrace healthy conflict. Once trust is established, a team must learn to engage in productive conflict. Dysfunctional teams avoid conflict like it's poison. They nod in agreement during meetings, avoid challenging bad ideas, and smile through gritted teeth while harboring resentment. On the surface, everything appears calm, professional, and polite. But beneath that polished facade lies a ticking time bomb of unspoken frustrations and unresolved disagreements. Catherine quickly realizes her team is trapped in artificial harmony, a state where meetings are filled with niceties and agreeable head-nodding but devoid of passion, courage, or meaningful debate. Decisions are made without examination, problems remain unsolved, and poor ideas slide through unchallenged because no one dares to raise a dissenting voice. Patrick Lencioni drives home an essential truth. Conflict isn't inherently destructive, it's the raw material for progress. But not all conflict is created equal. Healthy conflict isn't about personal attacks, shouting matches, or emotional outbursts. It's about engaging in spirited, unfiltered debate over ideas, decisions, and strategies. It's about challenging assumptions, questioning proposals, and refusing to settle for the first convenient answer. Catherine doesn't waste time tiptoeing around her team's aversion to conflict. She calls it out, exposes the underlying fears driving their reluctance, and sets the expectation that disagreements are not only acceptable but necessary. Lencioni points out that when teams avoid conflict, they don't actually eliminate it. They just drive it underground. Frustrations fester, side conversations take root, and team members start waging quiet wars of passive aggression. Meetings become exercises in theater, where everyone plays their part in a well-rehearsed performance of cooperation while harboring doubts and objections they'll never voice aloud. This kind of artificial harmony breeds resentment, wastes time, and stifles creativity. Contrast this with Pixar Animation Studios, a company that thrives on creative tension and unfiltered feedback. Their famous brain trust meetings are a masterclass in healthy conflict. Directors, writers, and animators gather to review projects in development, and no one holds back. Feedback is brutally honest, sometimes uncomfortable, but always rooted in the shared goal of making the film the best it can possibly be. Ego has no place in those rooms because every participant understands that candor isn't about personal criticism, it's about collective excellence. Director Andrew Stanton once said, We're trying to take the ego out of the room so we can solve the problem together. That's the essence of healthy conflict, a shared commitment to the success of the team, even when the conversations get uncomfortable. You see this same principle play out in Abraham Lincoln's presidency. In Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin, Lincoln deliberately surrounded himself with advisors and cabinet members who disagreed with him, argued with him, and forced him to see issues from multiple angles. He understood that dissent wasn't a threat to leadership. It was a tool for refining ideas and arriving at stronger solutions. Lincoln didn't silence his rivals. He listened to them. He invited them into the room, gave them a voice, and used their diverse perspectives to navigate the nation through one of its darkest chapters. His willingness to embrace conflict as a tool for growth became one of his greatest strengths as a leader. But healthy conflict doesn't happen by accident. It must be cultivated, encouraged, and protected. As a leader, you set the tone. If you shut down dissenting voices, react defensively to criticism, or reward surface-level agreement, your team will take note and fall in line with your behavior. If you reward those who speak up, if you stay calm in the face of disagreement, and if you demonstrate that robust debate is not only safe but celebrated, your team will follow your lead. You must create an environment where people know their voices matter, where they can challenge ideas without fear of retaliation, and where silence isn't mistaken for consensus. Meetings are a battleground for healthy conflict. When you gather your team to discuss strategy, solve problems, or make decisions, pay attention to the dynamics in the room. Are people nodding along without contributing? Do certain voices dominate while others remain silent? Are disagreements swept under the rug to keep the peace? If your meetings feel too polite, too scripted, or too quiet, you have a conflict problem. Healthy teams should have lively, spirited debates. Ideas should clash, assumptions should be questioned, and weak arguments should crumble under scrutiny. Without conflict, your team is just going through the motions, and the best ideas, the ones that could drive real change, will die in silence. Look to the Wright Brothers by David McCullough for another example of productive conflict in action. Orville and Wilbur Wright were pioneers in aviation, but they were also brothers who argued fiercely. They debated everything: the design of their aircraft, the calculations for lift and drag, even the location of their test flights. But their arguments were never about ego or dominance. They were about finding the truth. They challenged each other relentlessly, and every disagreement brought them closer to the breakthrough that would change history. You must foster that same spirit on your team. Make it clear that debate isn't a threat, it's an opportunity. Reward team members who voice dissenting opinions, even if their ideas aren't ultimately adopted. Teach your team to separate disagreement from disrespect, and remind them that the best ideas rarely emerge from polite agreement. Healthy conflict doesn't fracture teams, it fortifies them. It builds resilience, sharpens thinking, and leads to stronger, more sustainable decisions. Avoiding conflict might feel safe in the moment, but it's the fastest route to mediocrity. Lean into the discomfort. Challenge your team to speak their minds, and never punish honesty. If you want your team to grow, innovate, and succeed, you must teach them to fight, but fight well. Lesson 3. Drive commitment through clarity. Trust and conflict set the stage. But commitment is where teams often falter next. Without clarity and buy-in, decisions become fragile, and execution becomes haphazard. Catherine discovers that her team avoids making firm commitments because they fear being wrong. Meetings conclude with vague agreements, and team members leave with their own interpretations of what was decided. The result is scattered efforts, missed deadlines, and a cycle of second-guessing that paralyzes forward momentum. Patrick Lencioni introduces the concept of disagree and commit, a principle that recognizes a simple but powerful truth. A team doesn't need unanimous agreement to move forward. It needs collective commitment. Members must have the opportunity to voice their concerns, challenge assumptions, and debate openly. But once a decision is made, every member must fully commit to supporting it. regardless of their initial stance. Amazon's Jeff Bezos famously adopted this principle, embedding it into Amazon's leadership culture. Bezos understood that indecision kills momentum faster than a wrong decision. He emphasized that teams must be willing to disagree and commit to move forward decisively. Catherine forces her team to confront their indecision by demanding explicit commitments at the end of every meeting. No one leaves the room until every team member can articulate the decision, their role in executing it, and the deadlines attached to their responsibilities. Ambiguity is the enemy of execution, and Catherine knows it. Ambiguity allows team members to reinterpret decisions based on their preferences or convenience. It creates wiggle room for excuses and undermines accountability. A leader's job is to remove that ambiguity at every turn. In your own leadership, clarity must become your obsession. You must state decisions explicitly, ask team members to repeat them back in their own words, and ensure everyone understands not only what was decided but why it was decided. Define deadlines, responsibilities, and measurable success metrics. Make clarity unavoidable and unmissable. Lencioni illustrates how teams crumble without clarity and commitment. In one example, a company struggled with stalled initiatives because team members left meetings with differing interpretations of their objectives. Deadlines slipped, frustration grew, and blame replaced progress. In contrast, teams that thrive under commitment leave meetings with a shared sense of purpose and clear direction. Everyone knows their responsibilities, and there's no room for ambiguity. Steve Jobs, during his time at Apple, was relentless about driving clarity into every decision. Meetings ended with explicit action items, and Jobs would often call team members individually afterward to confirm they understood their assignments. This wasn't micromanagement, it was leadership. Jobs knew that clarity wasn't about control, it was about empowerment. Clarity doesn't just apply to strategic decisions, it applies to team values, priorities, and long-term goals. Catherine teaches her team that commitment isn't about blind loyalty, it's about alignment. When team members understand the why behind decisions, they're far more likely to commit fully, even when they initially disagreed. Leaders must foster an environment where team members feel safe challenging ideas but also understand the importance of unity once a decision is made. Imagine a rowing team where each rower decides to follow their own rhythm instead of the coxswain's commands. Chaos ensues, and forward progress grinds to a halt. Alignment requires discipline, and discipline requires clarity. You see this principle reflected in military operations, where clarity and commitment can mean the difference between life and death. In Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin, the authors describe how Navy SEAL teams operate under the principle of believe in the mission. Once a plan is decided, every SEAL must commit to executing it, even if they have reservations during the planning phase. There's no room for waffling or second-guessing in the middle of an operation. The same principle applies in corporate environments. Once a decision is made, every team member must move forward as if it were their own idea. But driving commitment isn't just about clarity at the top. It's about consistency throughout the organization. If leaders make decisions and then backtrack when challenged, they undermine the very commitment they sought to create. Leaders must model the same commitment they expect from their teams. If you waver publicly, your team will follow suit. If you treat decisions as optional, your team will too. Catherine makes it clear. Once a decision is finalized, it's non-negotiable. Team members are encouraged to raise objections during discussions. But once the debate concludes, unity becomes non-negotiable. In your team, you must build a culture where commitment isn't treated as conditional. Conditional commitment sounds like, I'll do this if everything goes perfectly, or I'll support this if it aligns with my personal preferences. That mindset erodes trust and undermines teamwork. Real commitment sounds like, I may have disagreed, but I will give this my full effort because the team decided it's the best course of action. As a leader, you need to make that expectation crystal clear. Accountability becomes far easier when commitment is established up front. Deadlines aren't missed because they are vague. Responsibilities aren't abandoned because they weren't clearly defined. Execution becomes smoother because team members know exactly what they need to do and why it matters. Catherine holds her team members accountable for their commitments, not because she wants to play enforcer, but because she understands that accountability is the natural companion of clarity. Ask yourself whether your meetings end with firm commitments or vague agreements. Do team members leave with clarity about their responsibilities and timelines? Or do they leave with more questions than answers? Do you create an environment where team members feel confident in committing, even after they've disagreed? If the answers are unclear, your commitment problem starts with you. You must drive clarity relentlessly, refuse to settle for vague agreements, and hold yourself and your team accountable for follow-through. Your takeaway is this: commitment doesn't come from forced agreement or superficial nodding. It comes from clarity, alignment, and accountability. Disagree passionately during the discussion phase, but once a decision is made, move forward with unwavering focus. Don't let fear of failure or indecision paralyze your team. State decisions explicitly, demand alignment, and refuse to let ambiguity creep into your execution. When every team member leaves the room with clarity and a shared sense of purpose, they'll move faster, smarter, and with greater confidence. Don't settle for waffling or half-hearted commitment. Clarity fuels action, and action drives results. Lesson 4. Foster accountability among peers. The fourth dysfunction emerges when team members hesitate to hold each other accountable. In Catherine's team, people avoid tough conversations because they fear damaging relationships or stepping on toes. This avoidance creates a vacuum where underperformance, missed deadlines, and low standards thrive. Lencioni emphasizes that peer-to-peer accountability is far more effective than top-down enforcement. In a healthy team, members don't wait for the leader to address problems. They call each other out respectfully but firmly. Catherine quickly realizes that her team has adopted an unspoken rule: problems flow upward. Instead of addressing issues directly with one another, team members escalate concerns to her, placing her in the role of referee. This creates a bottleneck and undermines team cohesion. Team members begin to view accountability as the leader's job, not their own. Catherine knows this dynamic must change, so she sets clear expectations. Accountability is not solely her responsibility. It belongs to everyone on the team. To drive this point home, she challenges her team to address issues directly with one another before bringing them to her. Catherine makes it clear that avoiding hard conversations isn't kindness, it's negligence. When you let a teammate slide on a missed deadline, an incomplete project, or a dip in performance, you're sending a message that standards don't matter. Worse, you're silently communicating to your high performers that excellence isn't valued. Accountability isn't about policing behavior, it's about upholding the standards the team has collectively agreed upon. The best teams understand this instinctively. In Navy SEAL teams, accountability isn't optional, it's a matter of survival. SEALs monitor each other relentlessly, not out of distrust, but out of an unshakable commitment to shared goals and mutual survival. If one person fails to follow through, the entire team pays the price. This principle extends beyond elite military units. Pixar's Brain Trust meetings are another example of peer accountability at its finest. In these meetings, directors, writers, and animators provide candid feedback on each other's projects. There's no sugarcoating, no tiptoeing around egos. The expectation is clear. If something isn't working, it's everyone's responsibility to call it out and offer suggestions for improvement. This isn't about personal criticism. It's about making the work better, together. Pixar thrives on peer accountability because every team member feels ownership over the final product. They're not just executing tasks, they're safeguarding excellence. Accountability also thrives in cultures where expectations are crystal clear. Catherine learns that ambiguity breeds excuses. When people aren't sure what's expected of them, it's impossible to hold them accountable. As a leader, you must set explicit standards for performance, behavior, and results. Everyone on the team should understand what success looks like and how it will be measured. But even with clear expectations, Peer accountability doesn't happen naturally. It must be intentionally fostered. Catherine begins modeling this behavior herself. When she notices an issue, she addresses it directly and respectfully with the person responsible, rather than waiting for someone else to step in. Her team watches her example, and over time, they start following suit. But fostering peer accountability isn't just about encouraging tough conversations. It's about creating a culture where those conversations are safe. If team members fear retaliation, humiliation, or dismissal, they'll never speak up. Catherine makes it clear that accountability conversations are not personal attacks. They're acts of commitment to the team's goals and values. Lencioni emphasizes that healthy teams separate accountability from blame. Accountability asks, "How can we fix this together?" rather than "Who's at fault?" Blame isolates, accountability unites. In contrast, dysfunctional teams avoid accountability conversations altogether. Issues fester, resentment builds, and the team's standards erode. It's like a sports team where no one calls out a teammate for skipping practice or slacking during drills. The lack of accountability doesn't just affect the underperformer, it affects everyone. High performers become frustrated, middle performers stop pushing themselves, and low performers get comfortable in mediocrity. In contrast, high-functioning teams operate like championship sports teams. Teammates don't hesitate to call each other out when someone isn't giving their best effort because they understand that every individual's performance impacts the collective outcome. One of the clearest historical examples of peer accountability comes from the Apollo 13 mission. When disaster struck, the astronauts and engineers didn't waste time assigning blame. Instead, every team member took ownership of their role in solving the crisis. If someone spotted an oversight or a potential failure, they spoke up immediately. Ego had no place in the conversation, and neither did defensiveness. Their lives depended on collective accountability, and their success became one of the most celebrated examples of teamwork in history. As a leader, you must ask yourself whether your team is comfortable challenging each other. Do they avoid confrontation because they expect you to step in every time? If so, you're enabling dysfunction. When team members look to you to enforce every standard and address every misstep, you're not building a self-sustaining team, you're creating dependency. The best leaders know when to step back and let team members resolve issues themselves. You must create a culture where peer accountability is the norm, not the exception. Praise team members who hold others accountable, and step back when possible to let these conversations happen naturally. You cannot allow conflict avoidance to masquerade as politeness or team unity. True accountability doesn't tear teams apart. It binds them together. It creates an environment where people don't fear being called out because they know it comes from a place of mutual respect and shared purpose. When team members hold each other accountable, trust deepens, performance improves, and goals become easier to achieve. Accountability isn't about blame. It's about shared ownership. Without it, dysfunction will creep into every corner of your organization. Your takeaway is this: accountability isn't just a leadership responsibility, it's a team responsibility. Build a culture where team members feel empowered to address issues head-on, where silence isn't mistaken for agreement, and where high standards are upheld by everyone, not just enforced from the top. Step back when necessary. Encourage tough but respectful conversations, and make it clear that accountability isn't about punishment. It's about commitment. If you want to build a team that thrives under pressure, excels in execution, and holds itself to the highest standards, foster accountability among peers. The health of your team depends on it. Lesson 5. Focus on collective results. The final dysfunction is the most insidious: inattention to results. When personal goals, departmental silos, or ego-driven priorities overshadow collective outcomes, teams lose their edge. Catherine's team initially prioritizes individual achievements over company goals. Sales targets, departmental budgets, and personal recognition become more important than shared success. This mindset isn't always obvious at first. It creeps in subtly. Team members begin focusing on how their department looks in reports, how their individual performance might affect a bonus, or how they can stand out in leadership's eyes. Slowly, the team dynamic fractures, and collaboration erodes. Lencioni underscores that great teams measure success by collective outcomes, not individual victories. A team can have incredibly talented individuals, but if those individuals aren't rowing in the same direction, the boat will spin in circles. Catherine understands this and begins relentlessly refocusing her team's priorities on shared goals. She introduces collective scorecards, aligns incentives with company-wide achievements, and eliminates systems that reward individualism at the expense of team performance. You see this principle exemplified in the San Antonio Spurs, one of the most successful franchises in NBA history. Under the leadership of coach Greg Popovich, the team adopted a culture of selflessness and shared accountability. Superstar players like Tim Duncan, Tony Parker, and Manu Ginobili consistently set aside their personal stats and accolades in favor of team championships. When Duncan, one of the greatest players in NBA history, willingly took a salary cut to keep the team's core intact, it sent a powerful message: collective results come first. The Spurs didn't just have talent, they had alignment. Every pass, every defensive play, and every strategic adjustment was made with one goal in mind: winning championships. The result was a dynasty built on sacrifice, humility, and shared focus. But the lesson isn't limited to sports. Take a look at one of the most famous historical examples of collective achievement: NASA's Apollo program. Landing a man on the moon wasn't a victory for one scientist, one engineer, or one astronaut. It was a triumph of shared focus. Thousands of people across different disciplines, departments, and specialties worked toward a singular goal. When mistakes happened, they weren't hidden to protect reputations. They were dissected, learned from, and corrected. Nobody in the Apollo program was concerned with individual credit because the mission was far too big, and the stakes were far too high. Catherine brings this same clarity of purpose to her team. She ensures that team meetings always end with a review of shared goals and that every department understands how their contributions support the larger mission. Focusing on collective results doesn't mean ignoring individual contributions. It means putting those contributions in context. If someone excels at their job but undermines the team's overall performance by operating in isolation or prioritizing personal gain, their success becomes meaningless. Catherine realizes this and begins celebrating team achievements publicly. Instead of spotlighting one star performer, she ensures the entire team feels ownership over wins. This isn't about diminishing individual effort. It's about creating an environment where every win feels like a team victory and every loss feels like a shared responsibility. One of the most common traps teams fall into is allowing silos to form. Departments start hoarding resources, withholding information, or competing for leadership's attention. Instead of rowing in unison, they start sabotaging each other, often unintentionally. Catherine dismantles these silos by fostering open communication, aligning incentives across departments, and tying bonuses and recognition to team goals rather than isolated metrics. She introduces shared dashboards that track collective progress, making it impossible for team members to hide behind individual successes if the team is failing. Amazon under Jeff Bezos provides another striking example of relentless focus on collective results. At Amazon, customer obsession isn't just a slogan. It's an operational principle that ties every team, every project, and every goal together. Bezos famously emphasized that every product launch, strategic initiative, or innovation had to be justified through its contribution to customer satisfaction. Individual departments couldn't succeed if the broader company mission was failing. This alignment didn't happen by accident. It was reinforced through meetings, performance reviews, and cultural expectations. But focusing on collective results requires discipline. It demands that you, as a leader, refuse to reward lone wolf behavior, no matter how impressive the outcomes might seem. It requires constant vigilance against subtle signs of self-preservation, like information hoarding or passive resistance to collaboration. Catherine learns to ask hard questions. Are team members celebrating shared victories, or are they only focused on their own wins? Are departments operating like fiefdoms, Or are they supporting each other toward a shared mission? Are incentives unintentionally rewarding individualism over collective achievement? As a leader, you must ensure that your team's efforts are aligned with overarching objectives. You must communicate shared goals regularly, track progress transparently, and reward behaviors that prioritize collective success over personal ambition. You must create an environment where every team member understands that their contribution matters, but the team's success matters more. When someone prioritizes their own goals over the team's, address it immediately, not as punishment, but as a reminder of the larger purpose. Collective results aren't about diminishing ambition. They're about channeling ambition toward a goal that transcends individual egos. Catherine demonstrates that the highest-performing teams aren't made up of self-serving superstars. They're made up of talented individuals who understand that their strength lies in their collective effort. You must instill this mindset in your team. Make shared goals visible, celebrate team victories, and minimize internal competition. Success isn't about individual brilliance, it's about collective achievement. Your takeaway is clear. Collective results are the ultimate measure of team success. If your team prioritizes individual goals, recognition, or departmental wins over shared outcomes, dysfunction will fester, and progress will stall. Your role as a leader is to ensure alignment at every level, to make collective success the standard by which all achievements are measured. Create scorecards that track team-wide progress. Reward behaviors that support collaboration, and eliminate incentives that breed internal competition. Foster an environment where team members see their contributions as part of something larger than themselves. When you prioritize collective results, you unlock the true potential of your team. Conclusion. In the 5 dysfunctions of a team, Patrick Lencioni doesn't just describe team dynamics. He provides a roadmap for fixing them. Trust, conflict, commitment, accountability, and results aren't isolated challenges. They're deeply interconnected. Without vulnerability-based trust, conflict remains superficial. Without healthy conflict, commitment is weak. Without commitment, accountability falters. Without accountability, collective results suffer. These dysfunctions are not abstract. They are observable, measurable, and most importantly, fixable. If you want your team to thrive, you must confront these dysfunctions with courage and consistency. For further insight, consider reading Good to Great by Jim Collins for lessons on disciplined teams, or Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek for insights into building trust and loyalty. But don't stop at reading. Take action. Leadership isn't a spectator sport. It's a daily practice. Build trust, encourage conflict, demand commitment, enforce accountability, and pursue results relentlessly. The health of your team and your organization depends on it. The end.